Bree Hall, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. How are y'all doing? I know it's 2:45, right after lunch. Maybe people are starting to get a little tired. It's okay. We're going to have a good time. So, really quick, because I tend to yap on a little bit too long. First, I am Bree. I am a senior developer advocate at Atlassian. I really like front end web development, and you'll usually find me talking about making all kinds of things cute with code. But today, we're going to be talking about something a little different, and I think it's something that a lot of us are dealing with now, which is navigating the world of AI and how it's evolving basically every day, it feels like. And then I'm also a technical content creator, and a little fun fact about me is I absolutely love the fall time. Can you believe that as of today, we are 77% done with this year? It's crazy. Before we even know it, Thanksgiving is going to be here and the end of the year is going to be here. But other than that, one of my favorite things about this time of year isn't just the fact that it's fall. We start to see like Spotify Wrapped or like different Wrapped experiences. And it's always a toss up for me. We're friends now, so I'll tell you, me and my husband share the same Spotify account. So it's always a toss up of, are we going to get his Thunderstorm soundtrack at the top of the charts that he listens to every night? Or are we going to get like my gaming lo-fi that I tend to listen to? But the fun part is, all of our apps sort of have a version of a wrapped experience now, right? Like any app that you can think of. I know some people have joked about having a Jira Wrapped. I haven't seen that one just yet, but maybe it might be coming soon. So one of the items that I want to talk about today, consider a wrapped experience, but maybe for book lovers, because I really, really enjoy reading. So, a company called Fable implemented a wrapped experience for books to basically give users a cute, little, quirky, customized experience to talk about what their summaries of the year looked like. Like maybe what kind of books they read, or maybe like specific genres. And some of the results, well, let's see. One reader said that they got a feedback loop of this. They were a Black reader, and their or not Spotify Wrapped, their Fable Wrapped basically told them that their journey dives into the heart of Black narratives. Don't forget to surface for the occasional white author, okay? Yikes. Another reader who read a lot about disability was called an intrepid dreamer, whose journeys could earn an eye roll from a sloth. Okay? And another reader who was focused on diverse authors was chided with, "Your bookshelf is a vibrant kaleidoscope, making me wonder if you've ever been in the mood for a straight cis white man's perspective." Now, how many people do you think tested this, looked at any of these items before they shipped them out to real users? The answer is likely not many, if not zero. So as you can imagine, the backlash for Fable and their team and these wrapped experiences that people were seeing was almost immediate. Now, they did pull the AI feature. They apologized and explained that they should have done a lot more testing. But unfortunately, the damage was already done at that point, and it's already been, like posted on socials. And it was really deeply offensive. So that really begs the question that I think a lot of us ask when we see things like this is like, how did this even happen? How did this get out of the boardroom? And that's actually what we're going to talk about today, is the how of how instances like what we just saw end up happening. Now, I think a lot of us know that AI isn't magic, but sometimes what we have to really do is reframe how we're thinking about it and maybe start to think about it as more of a mirror. So there are a lot of limitations with an AI itself, and it can basically just reflect the data that we give it, the instructions that we write, and very often any of the blindnesses or blind spots that we may have also as creators. So over the next 40-ish minutes or so, we're gonna talk about first, how to dig into the root of the problem, which is going to be the limitations and hidden biases of AI. We're also going to talk about the stakes and look at what happens when people are excluded or their lives and livelihoods are affected by these biases. And then we're also going to walk away with a practical framework or guidance on how we can go about creating and contributing to AI that is more ethical and AI that is for all people. So I'm curious about the makeup of folks that we have in the room. How many people would consider themselves developers? Good majority of the room. Designers? Perfect. Managers or product managers? Perfect. Do we have any like execs or C-level folks? Okay, very good. We have a really good range. Now, the fun thing is we're not going to be diving like too much into code, so you don't have to get a little fearful of like looking at code for the next 40 minutes or anything like that. But I do, before we move too far, just want to get on the same page about like two terms that we're going to use a lot, which are AI and machine learning. So I just want to create a little distinction. So we can think of AI as the broader idea of making computers smart, or making computers or machines think, learn, solve problems like us as humans. This can be anything from having a robot that talks to having a like self-driving car. And then machine learning is a smaller subset or a different type of AI, and it is basically a program that is explicitly programmed with rules that learns from different sets of data. So the more data it gets, the more it's going to learn. So you can think of this like whenever you have the junk folder inside of your email, it is going to learn what's junk and what's not junk by looking at thousands and thousands of pieces of mail. So I want you to think about this like a picture book. Does anybody have kids in the room? I think a lot of us, okay, perfect. So you know that sometimes kids just learn things and you're not always sure where they learn them from, like different odd behaviors. So if we give a toddler a picture book and the picture book always says that apples are red, eventually they will learn that apples are red. The picture book in this case is our training data, and the lesson that we're trying to teach them about apples is our algorithm. Now, the challenge comes sometimes when we don't know how the toddler learned the lesson. We consider this our black box problem within AI. We give it an input, it gives us an output, but that decision-making process can be a little bit unclear, and we don't always know why or how it made the choice that it did, which makes spotting these problems incredibly tricky. Now, it's not just the black box problem that makes AI systems challenging. There are a whole host of limitations, things like things like hallucinating. I'm sure we've all used a version of AI, ChatGPT, that is very confident, but it's very wrong at the same time. I know that that's happened to me quite a few times, and it just makes me laugh a little bit. But there can also be things like lack of real-world context, which can lead to really bizarre or weird output, like we saw with Fable. And without those constant and careful guardrails, it can produce some undesirable and a lot of times harmful content as well. Each one of those is its own significant hurdle and can probably be its own talk, but today what we're going to focus on is probably one of the, or I consider it one of the most pervasive and socially impactful issues, which is bias. So if AI is learning from our picture book, and our picture book just has red apples in it, what happens if that is flawed? That brings us to the root of the problem, which is that bias is basically the technical root of harm and exclusionary actions and outcomes that come from AI. So what is it really? Bias can be referred to as the occurrence of unfair or discriminatory patterns that happen from human biases in the original algorithms themselves or in the original training data for machine learning models. And this is what directly leads or contributes to outputs that are harmful or outputs that we just generally don't want. Now, researchers have defined quite a few different kinds of bias, but for our purposes today, we're going to talk about 6 main different kinds of bias and where they can show up specifically in the machine learning workflow. So, I know that, I hope you can see it well too. Don't get too overwhelmed by this. This is a typical machine learning workflow that I borrowed from Kagel's AI ethics course, which I highly recommend if you've never taken it. But this basically just gives us an overview of what a potential machine learning workflow could look like. We're not gonna dive into all of the individual pieces, but we're just gonna talk about it at a really high level. So the process really begins on our left-hand side, mostly my right-hand side, it's okay, with the data collection process. This is where we are defining a target and measuring features in order to create a data set. And then from that data set, we are splitting it into 2 things. The first one is going to be the training set, which is used to teach the model, and then we have the test set, which is used to evaluate that model. And then after we have those, the model integrates that information back into the real world system. Now, what's important to recognize here is this is a constant feedback loop. The data that we're generating and using for test and evaluation is eventually going to be used to generate more data. And as we'll see, the areas that are marked in red are different critical places where bias can arise in our pipeline. So the first bias that we're going to talk about today starts at the very beginning, and it happens with the world itself. This is going to be historical bias, and this means that the data that we collect is already representing a flawed world and a flawed reality, which unfortunately is the one that we live in. So for instance, if you train a model on 30 years of hiring data from the tech industry, it might learn that predominantly men have been hired and then therefore learn that men are the correct hiring choice. Now, it's not necessarily being malicious, but it's learning from patterns of a bias history. The next one is going to be representation bias, and this moves when we are starting to create our actual data sets. Now, this is when our picture book is missing chapters about what other kinds of apples and what colors there are for apples. So the question to really ask is, are we sampling the right population for the problem that we're trying to solve? Because if your data doesn't accurately represent the people that you want to serve, your model will not actually work for them. And then at this stage, we can also encounter what's called measurement bias. Now, this is a really tricky one that can happen when we choose a poor proxy for something that we cannot directly measure. So when we think about things in the real world, like policing, we may use arrests for crime as a proxy. And what does that actually represent is the really big question. Does it represent that crime is happening in a place or that police are more active? The proxy that we choose can have a very harmful feedback loop if we're not very careful about it. So once we have our data, we get to the modeling phase, and here we can introduce what's called aggregation bias. And this happens when we define our model by lumping distinct groups of people together versus just having them be separate. So if we think about schools, we may predict grades that work well, or we may have a model that predicts grades well on average across an entire school system, but what about underfunded schools? It's hard to predict those when they're all lumped in as an average because the circumstances are a lot different at this one school versus the average of all of the other ones. We also face evaluation bias. Now, this is where our test model against a benchmark isn't as diverse. So these are things that may work well in a lab but fail spectacularly for the people that they're trying to help. And finally, we can do all of the right things, it feels like, and still get down to deployment bias. Now, this is what happens when our model meets the real world. And this is where the model is used in a context that it was not actually designed for. So think of like facial recognition, where it is being tested in a lab that's very, very bright, that has the right filters or has the right background. It's going to work really well in that environment. But what happens when you put it on a security camera in a low quality environment or a very dimly lit environment? It may have the ability to fail when it comes to identifying people with darker skin tones. Now, the context of its use has created bias, and it's a harmful one, not that it was intended to be that way, but a lack of testing has done that. The big thing to know that about all of these 6 different kinds of bias, and I know that it was a lot, is bias isn't just born of like one glaring mistake. It's basically 1,000 different little unexamined assumptions that we have because every single one of us has them, because every single one of us has a different lived experience, and we tend to make them along the way. So, after seeing all of the different kinds of bias there are and where they can come in within the machine learning workflow or pipeline, the real question is, how do we go about getting it out once we've identified it? The good thing is that we're not powerless here. We have all kinds of things that are useful to us when it comes to AI fairness, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But there are a couple of different ways to combat bias as well once that we have identified them. Now, I will say they are very, very mathematical, so we're just going to talk about them more so at a higher level so you know what is available. So the first one is going to be making adjustments in pre-processing, and this is where we try to fix the bias before we even start getting into the model. So this is going to be like rebalancing our flawed picture book, for example, or adding more examples of apples. We can do this by collecting more data from underrepresented groups or by mathematically reweighing the data to make sure that certain examples get a little bit more importance. The second way is in processing, and this is by changing the learning algorithm itself. So basically, we are giving the model two different goals at one time when we do in processing, and that is to both be as accurate as possible and then also to be as fair as possible. Now, this can get extremely complex because retraining the model requires a lot of different statistics and mathematical operations, but it can also be very effective because it builds fairness directly into the model itself instead of relying on the data that it's getting. And then lastly, we have post-processing. Now, this is what happens after the model has already been trained, and this is basically where we take the outputs and make adjustments to them manually in order to achieve a fair outcome. So a common way of doing this might be to set different prediction thresholds for like different groups. Think of it like a grading curve if everybody in the class has unfortunately failed the test. I was in college, so I know that's happened a couple of different times. And then you take the person who got the highest of the low scores, and now that is your new 100. That's basically kind of like what post-processing is. Okay, have I lost anybody? Are we still here? Are we okay? Okay, perfect. So what happens when these same biases that we saw in our Fable social media example, what happens when they actually make it to larger scale systems that affect our livelihoods? That algorithm has a chance to change our very livelihood in our lives, and that's actually what we're going to talk about today with a company that I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, and it's called Workday. So in a recent lawsuit that has not yet been decided in court, there was claims that Workday's AI-powered screening tools were systematically discriminating based on people who were Black, who were disabled, and people who were over 40. Now, Workday's response is very fascinating, and I'm excited to talk about it today because I think it brings up a lot of what we are facing in terms of challenges in terms of AI ethics. So they argued that the lawsuit was without merit, and in their public statements, it was very clear that their statement was that their AI does not make hiring decisions, that customers have full human oversight, and their models are not even trained to identify protected characteristics like class or race. And they only look at qualifications that are listed in the application and compare them to qualifications that the employer has identified. Now, I think this is a really good point to pause on because it brings up the intent versus impact dilemma that I know a lot of us have seen or have dealt with. Companies that do things and they say they didn't intend to harm people, but in reality, sometimes people were hurt, their livelihoods, whether it was costly or their person. And the question is, even if you didn't intend to do it, are you still responsible for whatever impact it caused? Now, even if we assume with the best of intentions that their system was not created in order to be biased towards certain people, the lawsuit alleges that the impact, what happened, the people who were discriminated against, it's still discriminatory. And it shows that even by removing that protected data or by not training models on it, bias can still be very sneaky because it can use things like proxies that we talked about a couple of minutes ago in seemingly neutral data points and use things like the high school that you went to or your zip code or different verbs that you use on your resume, or one that I've seen a lot, email. I know that people talk about AOL emails or Hotmail emails. People may associate those with people who are older and they may not think about it, but that's something that tends to happen. And it can use those things like a proxy in order to infer. So the key to take away of this is good intentions are not a shield against harmful outcomes. You can want to do the right thing, but if bad things happen, your good intentions are not a shield from what actually happened and who was impacted. So in the wake of their legal challenges, Workday increased its commitment to responsible AI, and they doubled down, and they did two things. They first established their own AI governance program internally, and they also actively pursued 2 external certifications in order to show that they are well-versed in AI and that their commitment to creating ethical and responsible AI is there. This was a defensive and a trust-building posture, and it's a direct response to the massive business risk that they saw from the alleged lawsuit itself. Now, Workday aside, I want to talk about what this can look like for any company here, regardless of how many people work there, regardless of industry, because in theory, it could happen to anybody. So the first thing is there is an immense financial loss when you don't create ethical AI. All of these could trigger, of course, what we think about in terms of like years of legal fees, but there's also the cost of internal discovery and having to allocate your best development resources or leadership resources to these ongoing managements and to find the crisis. So then beyond the lawsuit itself, you can also get into a multi-million-dollar cost of creating a new governance program, because I know that that wasn't cheap. Basically, once you factor all of these in, if your company is publicly traded, you may also unfortunately face a little bit of a stock dip as well once some of your investors get the whiff that maybe your product potentially could be discriminatory. The next one, and it could be more damaging, is reputational damage. For us and our companies, trust is one of the most important things that we have from our customers. So if your customers hear that your product is potentially discriminatory, they might lose faith between your customers and your users. They also may start to ask if they can trust their data with you. And then internally, you also may face a crisis of your own employees wondering if this is still a good environment for them, because morale is very important. Your employees want to work somewhere that they can be proud of. Regardless of whether you are a B2B, B2C, it gives your competitors also the perfect narrative against you. And then finally, which could be the most fundamental risk of all, is just building a product that does not work. If your company is building a product that has segmented out or is systematically excluding a lot of people or has poor results for a large segment of the population, it isn't just an unethical tool, it is literally just a broken one, and that would have to be resolved. So an AI's product's promise is to be more efficient and to be more effective, and if it's segmenting off a boatload of people, then it's genuinely just not doing that, which is a bigger problem and honestly just bad for business. So the fallout from a bias model can be staggering, and it basically touches everything from an individual's career to a company's bottom line. And now that we are basically moving at the breakneck speed of AI, sometimes we have to pause for a second and sit down and just think about whether our process is still working. And in a lot of areas, this means that maybe it's time for our process to change. So whether you are writing code or managing a team or setting the budget, how do we prevent this from happening in the first place so that we don't have to ask, how did this actually happen? This brings us to a path forward. So this is the hopeful part, that we get to be better, that we get to see that bad things have happened, but we get to be the people that pioneer the change. We, in order to do that, have to start thinking a little differently. So for years, the tech world has been driven by the question, what new and amazing things can we build with blank technology? What new AI things can we build? It's been a question of capability, how fast can we do it? And I get it. It's exciting, it's innovative, but we are missing a really critical piece of the puzzle. In order to build responsible AI, we have to flip the script, and we maybe should start asking some different questions. So maybe instead of, can we build this or is this possible, the question now has to be, who are we building this for and how could it harm them? We have to ask that first. This is a core mind shift change, and we moved from talking about capability first to talking about human first, which is where we really should be. This is really a commitment to foresight, to empathy, which is huge, and to a healthy dose of humanity as well. And it's going to be the practical foundation for any team, and I have 5 different concrete mindset steps that we can walk through in this framework. So the first one is going to be to always start with people and not with the problems. Before a single line of code is written on your product, on your AI model, we have to ask in the human-centered world of understanding what the real world context of the problem is. This isn't just online. This is working directly with the communities that we want to serve, because if we don't understand what their problems are, we can't actually solve them. So this is observing people as they are using tools currently and not just asking them what we want, because a lot of times as developers, or if anybody's freelanced before, your customer might say that they want something, but you know it's really different based on what they're actually telling you. So we can't just ask them what they want, because what they say might be vastly different from what they actually need. It also means conducting deep interviews to understand their actual pain points, and then also assembling focus groups of diverse folks so that we can see what their perspectives are and then analyze that feedback that we have. This is a team sport, and I emphasize this because every single part of the development process should be involved in understanding who you're trying to serve. When developers have a clear and vivid picture of who it is, they are more likely to make empathetic choices and better solutions fundamentally when it comes to architecture. So once we understand who we have and who we're trying to help and what they need, we have to ask the hard question, does it actually require AI? And I know it feels like a bad word or a bad thing to say, especially when everybody is working so vastly hard to implement AI into everything, but the truth is not everything needs AI. So 2 questions that I have for you to ask yourself are, would it just be simpler to have a rule-based, not a machine learning-based system that is easier to audit and easier to maintain? Because if so, you might have to go with that. And the second one is, are we genuinely automating something that people find boring, repetitive, or difficult, and that we're not just doing it for the sake of putting AI into something? Starting with people ensures that we're solving for the right problem, and then asking these follow-up questions helps to make sure that we are doing it the right way. That also brings up step 2, which is going to be proactively imagining harm. Now, I love to think that everybody has the best of intentions and that everybody is nice and good-willed and natured, but we know today that that is not true. We cannot wait for our users to be harmed in order to go after that harm and mitigate it. So a lot of times this looks like building red teams internally so that you can red team your ideas and try to figure out what kind of harm is going to be caused. Now, I will say this also means sitting with discomfort sometimes and also asking yourself maybe some uncomfortable questions. You may need to say, how could this be misinterpreted or misrepresented? How could malicious users spread disinformation or harass people with my tool? You may not think that your tool could be used to harass people, but when people have bad intention or bad will, they are going to find a way to do what they want to do. So being proactive and understanding how they may be able to misuse your tool is a really big important part. And the next one is, what is the worst case scenario possible for our most vulnerable user? For whatever your most vulnerable user is, what is the worst thing that could happen to them? And again, it may feel uncomfortable to think about, but once you've already thought about it and you have different ideas, you are in a better posture and in a better place to start resolving for those things and putting safeguards in place. And then the third step is going to be to define fairness. Now, fairness in machine learning and AI is also something that can get a little bit mathy. So there is no universal one singular definition for what fair is. I'm pretty sure in a lot of scenarios, every single one of us might have a different definition for what fairness is. So there are a bunch of different kinds of fairness when it comes to machine learning and AI and statistics, but we're gonna talk about 4 main ones today, and because I always have a sweet tooth, we are going to talk about them in the term of cake, because I love cake. So the first one is going to be demographic parity or statistical parity. Now, this is the idea that a model is fair if the composition of people selected by the model matches the group percentages in the applicant tool. So if we have a group, it's a birthday party because we're having cake, of course. We don't have to have a birthday party to have cake, you can just go have cake. But in this instance, we're at a birthday party and there are 20 people evenly split between 10 kids and 10 adults. That means that for our model to reach demographic parity, 50% of the kids have to have cake. Now, this is a good approach in terms of representation for the outcome, but the potential weakness is we may have skipped over adults that wanted cake because we were prioritizing making sure that 50% of the kids that were at the party got cake. Next one we have is equal opportunity, and the goal here is very specific. It is to ensure that a model is as equally good at identifying a positive outcome for all groups. This is not necessarily about the final numbers, but it's more about the success rate of people who are qualified. So when we're thinking about our cake again, the question is, are we equally skilled at finding people who are hungry for cake in every group? So if we look at our example and imagine our party, we have 6 hungry kids and 3 hungry adults. our AI achieves equal opportunity when both instances of the groups are equal in terms of who got cake. So, for instance, 4 out of 6 kids got cake that wanted cake, even though there was 6 that were hungry, and 2 out of the 3 adults got cake as well. And our third is equal accuracy, and the last one and this one can get to be a little confusing, but the goal for this one basically is, did the model basically understand who should have cake, but also who should not have cake equally as well? So if we look and we have kids that were, 6 kids were hungry, basically what can happen is 2 kids who were identified didn't get cake. Then for the 8 adults who were hungry, it incorrectly denied cake for 2 adults as well. So both of these between false positives equal 80%, and that's basically what it would want to have. We achieved an overall fairness score, but we did it at the cost of providing equal opportunity to the qualified adults. And then finally, there is an approach called group unawareness, or fairness by unawareness. Now for this one, we're not necessarily cutting the cake, but it's more so like telling the person who is doing it to do it with the blindfold on. Now, the idea here is that you can't be biased because you can't see what's happening. But as we know, little kids typically have a higher or different pitched voice than adults do. So what can happen is, even if you think that you're not being biased, you're using proxy again as a determination of who could and who should not get cake. So even blindfolded, the baker may choose more high-pitched voices and guess that they belong to kids. And this, like I said, can end up being a proxy for information that we were trying to keep unaware. That was a lot. But the purpose of figuring out what the different kinds of fairness are is not just to have fun definitions or an excuse to talk about cake, which I will do all the time, whenever I'm given the opportunity. But it's more so to realize that whatever your goal of fairness is, there are still going to be consequences. So choosing to optimize for equal opportunity in a hiring tool, for instance, may mean that you don't achieve demographic parity when it comes to your final hiring class. Or if you choose equal accuracy, it may mean that you are systematically less successful at identifying qualified candidates from a specific group. No solution is perfect, and there is no neutral, just do it all option. So that means that you have to do a couple of things. We have to start turning these into deliberate product discussions within our teams. And this is where the real work happens, and it means that we have to get everybody, again, because it's a team sport, developers, product managers, designers, and leaders in the room and ask a couple of different questions. What kind of fairness aligns with our product goals and our company values? And what are the potential harms of the trade-offs of each different one? Because there's always going to be trade-offs. And then the next thing is, once you have defined what your goals are and what the trade-offs are, it's important to document that decision. We already have the black box problem of not always being aware of how certain decisions are made, but we can start to be better with this once we start documenting exactly why we made certain decisions, what the considerations were. That's not to say that we can't go back and make adjustments later, but at least we have a baseline for understanding where we started. And our fourth step, I know that last one was a big step with a couple of different things, but the fourth one is going to be to always keep humans in the loop. This is one of the biggest parts of human-centered design. So AI should augment human intelligence, and it should not replace it. So we want to align our systems to make sure that they are empowering people and giving them agency and control. And in places like we've seen with the Fable instance earlier, we need to have a way to give people the option to opt out of AI solutions that we have. That might be things like explicitly turning it off. It may also be doing things like giving people the ability to say, why am I seeing this ad? Or challenging how they're getting their feedback, or to see an explanation of why decisions were made. And we also want to start with prototyping without AI first, because we want to let humans be the actual first AI to see how they're actually going to use the products. And then finally, this one doesn't need a lot of, it's testing. Test, test, test. Test some more, and test again. So the thing is, these aren't just technical bugs. They are more so human failures, and they're failures of inclusion that we have seen over and over again, and we likely will continue to see until we start putting human design first. So we need to be inclusive in our races and genders and ages and disabilities, but more importantly, with lived experiences. We have to acknowledge that we don't have all of the answers with our own perspectives and that we are inherently limited, which is why we have to surround ourselves and include other humans in the process. That brings me to my final point today, which is we live and work around technology, but it's easy to forget that sometimes we live in an AI bubble. This room, this bubble that we all exist in, the general public does not. So we talk about AI, we see it everywhere. A lot of us are interested in it for the most part, even if we have a healthy dose of skepticism. But the general population, that's where things are starting to look a little bit different. So I got some information from the Pew Research, and it's that more adults than not believe that AI will not have a positive effect on the US in 20 years, and 43% think that AI will do more harm to them than benefit them. Now, it's important more now than ever to really take stuff like this seriously, because the products that we're building for, we're not always building for developers. We're building for the people who are outside of this room, and their trust is very fickle and it's constantly wavering. We see the potential, we see the excitement, we're really excited about the things that we can automate and the things that we could do, but for a lot of people, they are more concerned about their data privacy in an age where data is constantly being collected. They're also worried about the hands that this AI is falling into and who is using it and why they are using it. They're worried about their livelihoods, who has access to their information, and who is going to use it to harm them. So it is our responsibility to earn their trust and keep it, because we have to earn it. We can only do this by stepping outside of our little bubble where we always talk about AI and building tools that are transparent and fair and intentionally exclusive. So this brings me to an important question. What can I do? I've heard about bias, I've heard about human-centered design, I've heard about all the things. I want to do more, but what can I do? So I separated it into a couple of different action items. If you are a developer, an engineer, a designer, basically just don't judge a data set or just don't use a data set. Investigate its provenance. Think about where it came from, or like what kind of biases were introduced. Learn about practices like creating data sheets for data sets, or maybe when you build a model, use model cards in order to understand like what its intended uses are, what its limitations are, and its performance across different groups to be transparent. Be the person in the room that doesn't just say, can we build this, but also should we build this and who might it hurt or who might it harm? And if you're a manager, a director, a person in the C-level, what you can do is champion work from the top. Don't just ask your teams to create products that are fair. Allocate resources for it and make sure that you're creating a sense of psychological safety to make sure that when things do arise and maybe a process has stopped or halted, people don't feel bad or fear slowing down the process. Your leadership sets the precedent for ethics, and it's not optional. And lastly, for everybody in this room, regardless of what your title is, advocate for more voices in the places where technology is designed and built and funded. As we've seen today, representation isn't just like a society good, it is a critical component for risk mitigation and for product excellence as well. So champion the opposite. Champion inclusivity in your hiring, in your promotions, in your community, and what you can do is mentor somebody from an underrepresented background, and more so listen to them and amplify their perspective. But ultimately, if you have listened to nothing else that I have said here today, I want you to walk away and remember this. Technology cannot represent all people if it is not created by all people, full stop, that's it. It can't be created by, or it can't be used for all people if people were not included in the data collection process and the development process, their lived experiences. We have to have all people in the process. So if you've never looked into AI ethics or you were interested by any of the things that I've talked about here today, I have collected like a couple of different resources that I really love, a couple of books, courses, and articles. These were instrumentally helpful to me when I was getting started and really helped me get to a good point where I got really interested. So I'll go ahead and leave these up here for a second if anybody wants to take a pick. I highly recommend them. And other than the books, these are all free resources as well.
Thank you. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Was that a quote from you?
This one?
Yes.
Yeah.
You should probably put your name on it.
Oh, okay.
Just saying.
Thank you.
Does anyone have a question?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
It's a great speech and great information. It's always controversial as to what is biased versus unbiased. You know, it's a thing. So 2 questions. Number 1 is, how do we ensure continued, consistent, unbiased feedback, right? And the second part that you can follow up on is, how do we incorporate gluten-free cake for everybody?
Gluten-free cake, dairy-free cake, we can now have all the kinds of cake. I have no exclusions to cake. But in terms of making sure that our data is unbiased, it's a feedback loop. You will never get to a point where you have no biases. It's always going to be a process of, just like we talked about quite a few slides, with the machine learning workflow. I'll get back there eventually. But there is the process of aggregating the data, of cleaning the data, of breaking it out into evaluation, into test, and it's always going to be a combination of using, the different pre-processing, post-processing, and in-processing features in order to tweak the data, tweak the model, and then get to a point of comfort. But I don't believe that we'll ever get to a point where there's absolutely zero bias, because every single one of us in this room carries some version of a bias.
Thank you. We probably have time for one more question. Mm-hmm. Do I see a hand? Thank you.
So over the years that we've kind of been seeing a decrease in software development over the budgeting for quality assurance, and I think making sure that software, especially in regards to AI, definitely falls making it ethical definitely falls into the level of quality assurance and making sure that things are running as they should. How have you seen organizations other organizations really ramping to make sure that they're focusing on that and trying to bring more quality assurance into this, or I don't know, attempting to use other AI tools to make sure that to test quality assurance, and then if we're testing those as well?
Yeah, I've seen 2 ways. The first way is the proactive way, where there is at least one person who is championing on a team for AI ethics or for code quality, and that person is setting the bar higher within an organization. They're doing things like making sure that PRs don't go through without certain considerations that people are teaching internally about what those standards should be. I've also seen on the other side where, unfortunately, some companies have to have something happen in order to invest in the resources that they need for something to actually be done. And we've seen this in a lot of different scenarios where companies have been embarrassed, they do damage control, and then they spend all this money that they didn't think that they were gonna have to spend in order to basically clean up both their image, clean up their code, spend a lot of money. A lot of times the barrier, especially today, is resources, money. They don't want to allocate development. They don't want to allocate people in order to do it, because they are just trying to get to the finish line before they perceive others are going to get to the finish line. But again, usually having somebody or a team of people that has those standards and is championing them internally can do a lot of wonders, even though, especially when we talk about open source, those people are the people who tend to be under a lot of stress. And I won't say that it's sustainable, because those people are the people who are putting in time, effort, going through creating documentation, going through creating resources, and trying to instruct others, even if other developers who are contributing aren't at those same standards.
Bree, thank you so much.
Thank you.